Marianne. Welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Christy. I'm excited to be with you today.
Yeah, and I have been looking at things you've done and the books you've written and know a little bit about your background, but I'm just so excited to have you on the podcast because I say this often when I talk to children's authors. I love that we're bringing children into the conversation. So it's a dementia is a whole family piece that we need to look at everyone. So I'm so glad you did that. But you've also written a caregiver guide for caregivers. And as a professional in the industry, the caregiving industry, you've really offered something to people that I think is so helpful. So I want to talk about your books but maybe we can just start off and you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be an author and we'll go from there.
Sure. So, my background is nursing. I've been a nurse for a long, long time, over 30 years. And most of my nursing now has been in helping people in the assisted living industry. Some years ago, having responsibility for helping to design and implement programs in memory care settings. And all my life, I've been something of a writer, even as a very young child. And so combining those two passions, taking my writing passion and education in professional world together, I always thought I would write a book someday. Now, that book was not supposed to be necessarily on dementia. The two came together at some point, and that was the genesis of Meet Me Where I Am, an Alzheimer's Care Guide. I was doing a lot of dementia education, speaking at conferences and public seminars and so forth. And someone came up to me and said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I thought, well, why not? So, yeah, that's how
Yeah.
that sort of came to be.
That's fantastic. And so I think Meet Me Where I Am, just as a title, is so profound because that's really, I'm sure you, as someone in the industry, knows that's really the key component for how you're interacting with someone. So can you tell us a little bit more about where you like what you put into that caregiver guide and what it's sort of, and it's been out there for a while. So really tell us a little bit about where you're going with that and what you're using it for and how it's being received. That'd be great to hear about.
So initially began as a concept of how I wanted to help teach people in the industry to approach persons living with dementia to help them live their best each day. And, you only have such little time, such little snippets when you're working with people, and you want to give them something they can really take back and use as hands-on. So that's how it sort of began. And quick funny story that people don't know, a lot of times when I was doing my public seminars, I had this little snippet 36-hour day I would read as
Yeah.
my icebreakers. And I was doing a presentation one day and I lost it. I couldn't find it. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, goodness, dear Lord, please help me come up with something today that I need for my little icebreaker. And I started thinking, if I was the person with dementia, what would I want to say to them? And that's when I wrote the poem that's in the beginning of the Meet Me Where I Am book. I sat down
Mm.
in about 10 minutes. I said, this is what I would want if I was the person living with dementia. And what I drew from was all the people that I had been caring for all those years, living with dementia and those families. You know, the poem starts off saying, I'm raising my children. When I see you, I see my husband. Meet me where I am. And it's talking
Mhm.
that person, just really wanting you to walk beside them and walk that journey with them, versus what we are constantly doing is bringing that person into our present. It's time for you to take your medications. It's time for you to take your bath. It's time for you to eat. But that person may be saying, no, I don't think so. Not right now.
Yeah.
We all know when we have dementia, our reality at that moment may be something different. And we
Right.
have to enter that reality to gain that trust, to gain that understanding, to bring them to what maybe needs to be done in the moment.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then and then also the sort of refraining from the constant quizzing, like you remember, and we're trying to, as you said, bring them back to what we know because, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it seems to me I get where caregivers are doing that because it's so hard
Yeah.
to it's coming from a place of grief, it's coming from a place of fear, it's coming from a place of worry and anxiety. And oh, if I can just get them to hang on to this one memory, they'll be back, right? They'll be back.
And also
And
love. It comes from a place of love
yeah.
and ship that we remember. And, we almost want to bubble wrap, preserve, protect the person we remember and the relationship that we're used to.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the way I try best to help people understand is at the essence, what is dementia but brain damage? If someone were in a car wreck and they had an injury to their brain, we tend to understand that better. And we understand, that's the reason that they can no longer do what fill in the blank, whatever that function is that's lost. But that's the essence of dementia. It's brain damage. The brain cells are damaged, and that's the reason they can no longer do those things that we tend to expect or want. But when we start thinking of it that way, we think of it as that damaged brain cell, and that's the reason they can no longer necessarily maybe interact, respond, or even remember certain things. It tends to make a little more sense.
Right.
And we can tend to better understand that, okay, any given moment is going to fluctuate because the brain is that master organ. And we have to kind of step back, wait and see where they are, to meet them where they are, to understand they're still there.
Right.
They may
Right.
be a younger person, an older person, that same old person that we remember at any given moment. And it just takes a lot more patience, understand.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's really key because it's the absence of that actual event. And we can say, oh, it was that accident that did it. Whereas, you know, dementia creeps up sometimes. We might not see it might be there for and there for many years before it starts to be really apparent. And so it's at least that was my experience with my both my parents had dementia. My mother had Alzheimer's and my dad had vascular dementia, and it wasn't like a wow, one day they were this way and the next day it was a slow creep. So
Right,
yeah.
right.
So the absence of that event, and I think that's true. It's probably hard on caregivers then to sort of wrap their head around that. So that's really great. Do have you found that a lot of professionals have been using your book, and how has it helped them as care professionals?
Yeah, it's definitely used both by personal and professional caregivers. I think what I have heard most often come back to me is that it's an easy read. It's not written in professional ease, if you will. It's definitely written in a way to help people get what they need as timely as possible. I do use a lot of examples. I think some of the feedback I've gotten from many people is, I found myself or I found my loved one in the book, and I found scenarios that help give me some hands-on tools, especially in the professional caregiver realm that they could take back and use, and even in the personal realm. And at the back of the book, they say never read the end of the book first, but at the back of the book is sort of a quick start guide, especially for that person that may be struggling more, needing some real jump start. That's the jumper cables, if you will, for the caregiver.
Right, right.
So there's just some real, most common questions and answers that people tend to deal with in the back of the book.
Yeah, that's great though. That is great. And so that makes it so much more user friendly, I think. So, and it's interesting how people come to a book, especially a guide, what people are looking for. So that's, I think it's great to have that kind of resource in there. And then you wrote another book also about dementia, a couple other ones. I know I wanted to ask you about the children's book and how that came to be, and that was a follow-up. Or I don't know, it wasn't necessarily a follow-up, but kind of maybe tell us about the genesis of that book.
Yeah, that one has a real interesting story behind it. Grandmommy, a kid's guide for Alzheimer's and dementia, was a gleam in my eye for some time. I had written sort of the draft manuscript and had it sitting there for a while and wasn't quite sure which way I wanted to go with it. And I happened to meet my co-author with that through Meet Me Where I Am. I had found me through that book. Dr. Beatrice Tauber Prior, who is just a wonderful, phenomenal lady. She and I happened to both get our hair cut by the same lady one day along the journey. And she was talking to her hairdresser about her experiences with her mother who had dementia. And she had recommended my book to her. And that's how she found me. And we became fast friends. And one thing led to another. I said, you know what? I've got this manuscript, but it's not really done yet. And it really needs someone like you. She is actually a specialist for children. And I asked her if she wanted to partner with me on it. And she was like, you know what? I think I would. And she was really the missing piece to it. What she was able to add to it just made the book so much more valuable. And so she was able to bring her expertise to the storyline. And we really wanted the artwork to speak as much as the words, given the age group that we were targeting, and help tell the story. Because as you know, with young children, that's so important as
Oh,
well. So
absolutely.
we wanted to be a project that not only had, an entertaining storyline for the children, but was something that as a family, if you're the parent, because it certainly is not a read alone story for children, is something that the parent or whoever the adult is in the home that's working with the child could use to even help them.
Yeah.
So there's a letter to the parent, and it's something children can often be left behind when dementia is in the home, person living with dementia or the child. And as many of us have seen, children bring so much to that journey. And there are going to be some times when, yes, we're having those manifestations of symptoms where, if we're a little agitated or we're tired or whatever, we need to be more alone. But there's going to be wonderful times when we can all be together as a family, and normalcy is so important.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we wanted the book to be. We wanted to be that bridge, that connector on how do we do that, and how do we do that for as long as possible and maintain normalcy for as long as possible,
Right.
and
Right.
answer those questions. And
Yes, yeah. Like what's wrong with grandma and how come she didn't, yeah, and absolutely. And I think also what you were saying about children can sometimes be left behind, that's so important to remember that that dementia does impact the whole family. And
Mhm.
for sure, how do we maintain those connections? It can be scary for kids. It can be scary for kids to walk into an assisted living. So, I know you've been a professional in the assisted living community for a long time. Did you find there were ways that you tried to make it easier for kids or
Yeah,
activities? Yeah.
yeah, that's part of how this story, this whole book came to be. I would find sometimes it was hard for the children to really understand, and sometimes I would even see families just automatically shut the children out once
Mhm.
dementia diagnosis came. And I remember when I first got the idea to do this book, I was presenting and afterward doing some book signings for Meet Me Where I Am, and a lady came up and says, "Now, where's the children's book at?" And I said, "Excuse me." She goes, "You got to write a children's book." This has been so helpful. And she's holding my book up. She's, "I've been giving it out to all my family members, but I need a children's book." And I'm like,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So
fantastic. So that's really great. I know that's something that is so important for families is to know not just like, what can we do, but not to forget there's someone else in this picture oftentimes. And how do you encourage kids to interact with a grandparent who might not remember them or might, and then also might not want to do an activity, or who knows? There's all kinds of things that might interact or sort of impact that relationship. So I think that's wonderful. That's so great. And then I know you have one other book that you offer. And so I choose to remember. And can you tell us a little bit about that one? You're prolific, Marianne. So let's hear about the other one too. Yeah.
I Choose to Remember is a reminiscence therapy aid. It's a tabletop book. It has short stories. It has pictures as well that help stimulate memories, and it has places for journaling. So the original intent was more maybe for people living with dementia. It's made its way into other arenas. I know some groups that use it in psychology to help people dealing with depression. It has a little following for some younger people out there in the world who are like, wow, those are some interesting things that used to happen way back in the day,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's got a whole little vibe to it of just, kind of a little chicken soup for the soul vibe, if you will.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And then I know we'll talk a little bit more about where you can find your books, but I know that one you said you offer on your website,
Yeah,
correct?
that one's only offered on the
Yeah.
website. That is a self-published book. So that's on angeltreepublishing.com.
Okay. And then So I also want to ask a little bit about, I know you're very active in the caregiving community, and so you bring a lot of professional insight into this, but could you tell us a little bit about also how this is, or how has this ever been a personal endeavor for you, and how has that shaped sort of your books or where you're thinking in terms of what you're doing out there in the world?
Yeah. Well, Chrissy, that's a great question. I entered this in totally a professional realm initially. All of my books were written, well, Grandma and Me, I was actually had become a personal caregiver at that time, but the others was originally written more as a professional caregiver.
Hmm.
Um, but I will tell you, becoming that personal caregiver did definitely influence any future projects that I will be producing. Um, it's been a blessing for me to be able to be part of anything caregiving, obviously, as a nurse, being able to be part of the dementia community and learn from the persons living with dementia. They've been my teachers all
Yeah.
along.
Yeah.
But my greatest teacher will always now be my mother.
Yeah.
Uh, my mother, now I cared for her for physical conditions for a good while, but that's very different than when she became someone living with Lewy body dementia. And
Oh,
I
okay.
began
Yeah.
to suspect that a few years before her diagnosis, but it wasn't until we began to experience the symptoms and manifestations of Lewy body that I really began to better appreciate and understand all the different individuals that I had began to help along the way, and the different times they would come to me and say, "Oh my goodness, I feel like I didn't do the right thing today." And that's when it just got so personal because every day I found myself saying, "Oh my goodness, I feel like I didn't do the right thing today."
Yes. Yes.
I started thinking to myself, how many times have I told someone there really is no right and wrongs as long as we do our best because our best is all we can do. And, there's this thing called giving yourself grace to realize that this is the kind of journey where we're going to have good days, bad days. And when you're personally caregiving, it's personal
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're still the daughter, you're still the wife, the husband, the son, the sister, brother, and those relationships don't stop. We've always been, we're always going to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's such incredible insight because, and so I want to ask you, did you find then that who you were as a professional, how did that then impact you as a daughter caring for
Oh my
mom?
gosh, so many days I would feel like the biggest, I'm just going to say hypocrite, because here I was able to help literally, if I did the numbers, thousands of people to
Yeah.
do a job caring for their loved ones. And I would come home and fail in my own eyes with my mom. I mean, I wrote this book that won awards. I wrote this book that people were out there right and left saying, "Oh, it just helped me so much with my loved one." And then I would come home and I would make my mom agitated by the approach, or I would, next thing I know, my mom is cussing at me, or my mom is telling me, where I could go,
Yeah.
everybody can have some manifestations that can be a little more difficult than other journeys,
Yeah.
but I could actually rewind the clock and see where if I had not have done this, she probably wouldn't have done that. And in my mind, I knew better, but because of the historic mother-daughter relationship,
Yeah.
there's sometimes it was like I would come home and take the dementia educator hat off, and I would just be the daughter. I'll give
Right.
you an example. Mom was running late for a doctor's appointment, as typically would happen. We could start 2 hours ahead of time to get ready, and we would still be running late. I'm drying her off, trying to get her ready, and we're going as mom's speed would go. And mom says, "There's water on the floor."
Mm.
Well, there's no water on the floor. And I'm drying her off, and I need to meet her where she is. And I should have said, "Okay, let me take care of that." But instead, I'm in a hurry. I'm like, what do I say?
There's no water on the floor, Mom. Let's go.
Exactly. And so mom gives me a second chance to make this right. Mom says, there's water on the floor, dry it up so I don't slip on it.
Yeah.
The water is 3 feet from me. To dry that water up, I've got to make sure she doesn't fall. I've got to shore her up, do something really cool to go over there and get that water. So what do I say on the second chance?
About the same thing.
You're right. This goes on to the point that when the third chance comes and she tells me to go dry that water up off on the floor, I very quickly tell my mom and reassure her there's no water on the floor. I'm not going to let her fall. Now, my mom is a retired nurse, mind you.
Okay.
She's very worried about that water on the floor. She's not worried about getting to the doctor on time or anything else that I'm telling her. And she's mom.
Yeah.
Do what she says. And I wrote this book called Meet Me Where I Am.
So all of this stuff you're heaping on yourself is then wow, that's what caregivers experience. Yeah.
And it turned out to be a very not good next several hours
Hmm.
because mom got very agitated at her daughter who did not meet her where she was. It ended with me in tears when I realized I was the one that got her so agitated. And it's just one of so many examples.
Yeah.
And the hardest part is to give yourself grace when you unpack that to realize you're only human. The daughter trying to get her to a specialist appointment that they cancel if you're 10 minutes late, knew that she needed that appointment.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I mean, I can relate so much to that because what I can do for someone else as a professional is oh, I have that distance, but this
Absolutely.
is my mom. I know my mom. Look, she's and all of the years of her being my mom are still in my head as I'm saying, mom, there's no water on the floor, let's go.
So what I would love to say right now to any caregiver listening is give yourself grace. You're only human. There's going to be days where you don't always do exactly what you might know to do, but it's not wrong. It's just
Right.
human. And
Exactly.
you get a new day, a new moment every moment. You just take a deep breath, back up and say, reset,
Yeah.
reset.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And I really appreciate you talking about that because I think even people who aren't professional caregivers or nurses or somehow in a related field, the tendency to feel bad about what we're doing because it's not right. Like even feeling like they're not getting better, and that's in a progressive disease like any of the dementias. That's really hard. That's really hard to take. We want people to get better. Our health professionals want people to get better, but this is a different kind of thing. This is very hard. So I love that you're talking about that. And I'm wondering, now looking back and the books and the work that you've done, are there ways that you're like, is there another book coming and you're going to talk about this, or where are you with that?
Yeah, there's a couple of projects on my, I guess you would call drawing board list that are infant works right now. I don't think they'll be out anytime real soon, but there's definitely going to be one that is my rearview mirror of caregiving, if you will.
Hmm.
Um, the approach doesn't necessarily change, but it's more for helping caregivers to really do, I think, more self-care. I was horrible at that.
Oh,
I'm still, I think I'm just now coming out of that recovery phase. It's been 2 years since my mom passed,
okay.
and I think everyone deals with grief a little differently, but I don't know that we all deal with our grief, you know, a lot
Absolutely.
lift the rug, shove it under and close because what's,
Absolutely.
and that can impact us too.
Oh, tremendously. And I think the other thing is to, and I don't know where you are in your grief process, but what I found for myself and what I've seen with others is it is it's an ongoing process.
It
And
is.
for me, it was just I always call it the sneaky beast because I'd be fine. I'd be doing everything. Everything's great. And, I think I've dealt with everything, right? I've dealt with it. And then, um, maybe I'm cooking a recipe my mother taught me and I can't find the seasoning and I'm all I want is to ask her, well, what do I substitute? And
Right?
and then boom, I'm
Yeah,
right back in this
yeah.
place of like, oh my God, I didn't ask her these things and she's not here. And it's overcoming. It
Oh,
just
it is.
yeah. And it could be, my parents both passed away in 2015 and I still can be right back in that moment. And
Yeah.
it's so the piece about giving yourself grace, we also in grief have to give ourselves grace, I think, to realize, you know, it's not going to be over. We're going to miss somebody
Yeah.
for the rest of our lives. It's
Always.
about how do we cope and how do we integrate that. To me, it's just I've gotten to a different place with it, but it is really so I think self-care for caregivers and then in grief really important to speak to that.
Mhm.
What are some of the self-care tips that you might have mentioned in your caregiving guide or that you now as someone who's been on that other side, that personal side, what are the things that you think are really important for our listeners to hear as self-care techniques or
So,
strategies or yeah.
yeah, I think one that I do talk about, but I certainly think that no one gives enough attention to is really try to avoid isolation. I think caregiving, just because of all that's demanded of you, especially if you're the 24/7 caregiver, it becomes very isolating. And I don't just mean isolating because you are constantly giving of yourself. You don't realize how isolated you become from your previous self prior to caregiving. You hear this from many people. When the caregiving ends, it's almost like coming out of a someone who's suddenly finding themselves in a new relationship post divorce or something because the person they were before isn't there. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
they're they find that their friend circle or they had stopped going to church or they had stopped doing anything they did prior with their spouse, and you're rediscovering relationships or rediscovering how to be, because
Absolutely.
you let go of so much. Now, a lot of times people say, well, how do you not do that? Well, you just try really hard to find that balance. Even if it's just, I know I found myself, a friend would offer sometimes, hey, why don't you let me stay the night with your mom so you can go do something? And my response was always, that's so kind of you. Thank you, but no.
Yeah, yeah.
And we do that because of
Right.
several things. We don't want to impose. No one can do it like you do. It's your responsibility. I mean, fill in the blank, all these excuses.
Yeah.
Don't say
Yeah.
no. If someone offers, take it. And, if you can afford respite for yourself, give yourself a respite night, at least, once a month or whatever you can afford, take it.
Right, right. And find those resources in your community. There may be community resources that offer respite or, some sort of relief for you. I think the isolation piece is so critical. It also feels like, and I don't know what you think about this, but I know there were people who were there for me and could hear me and they didn't mind hearing the same thing again and again, because it was the same thing. But there were some people who didn't really want to, it was hard for them to hear my pain. And
Mhm.
so I had to, after caregiving, learn how to integrate those people back into my life. Some I did, some I didn't, but most I did. And it was like, it doesn't mean they didn't love me or didn't care about me. They just couldn't. But I think that that's part of the thing is that everybody um, can't do everything for you, but it's finding the people who can and definitely being willing to say yes to some of the offers of help. It's so hard.
Yeah. And then the other thing is finding what you can do just to, whatever your own little guilty pleasure is, if it's getting yourself a chocolate covered strawberry every now and then, or for me, it was, I do love nature. I couldn't, go out and hike or do those sort of things the way I wanted to, but I would find myself just going out, sitting out in the sunshine or, sitting out in the open area and feeling the breeze or looking up at the sky, just making myself step away just to hear the birds, having that moment of replenishment. whatever that is for you, take it. If it's the bubble bath with the candles, take it. Whatever you can do when you can, take it.
Right.
You've got to replenish.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we've all heard and seen statistics about how caregivers are more likely to become ill, or caregivers are more likely to have issues with, ending up in the hospital or other things. And you can't care if you're not there. So you've got to also have your routine health appointments and, make sure that you're attending to your own healthcare needs as well. It's very important.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that's absolutely critical, and it is true. I mean, we've, and so I think I might have shared with you my whole entry into this is kind of looking at sandwich generation, and I'll tell you, we take care of our kids, we take care of those people we have to take care of, we take care of our house, we take care of our pets, and like our doctor's appointments, we reschedule, we cancel, or we don't make them, and then we forget. It's so easy to forget that if we don't take care of ourselves, all those people that we're protecting won't have us.
Very true.
So important. I did have a question. I'm wondering, you're a professional in the field, and then you write this really amazing book about for caregivers. As you were experiencing life as a caregiver, did you think back, wow, I should have put that in the book? Or, wow, this is different than what I was telling? I mean, I'm just wondering, how did that impact you? Did you think, wow, I should change that. Maybe that'll go in the next edition. I'm just curious.
I really didn't have any moments of I should change that. I actually stepped away from the field for a few years and was able to enjoy doing nothing but dementia education, traveling around and enjoying that passion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I certainly was able to collect a lot of here's some thoughts for a next book, because you're always learning, you're always continuing to learn. But that's when my mom started getting a lot more sick and needy, so I had to stop doing that and doing my own consulting and stick closer to home, which brought me back to the industry. A lot of times those life changes also dictate what we do for our living, so that did bring me back to my career change. So it's just been more of just, I think, learning more. The
Mm-hmm.
more you are able to do, the more you're able to learn, I think. So it's been more in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say too, and I'll ask you if you experience this too. It feels like, you know, I agree. We're always learning more things, but even the field, right? Even what we know about different diseases of dementia, the different types, Lewy bodies is so misunderstood at times, hard to diagnose, oftentimes diagnosed post-mortem. And so, we don't know everything. So we're always learning new things. And so this previous understanding of something might, we have to shift our models in our minds at times and say, oh, well, no, we know better now. We didn't know that then. So are there some shifts that you're seeing there that you think are important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, I think, there's still this tendency for, I think, just the population in general to want to just say dementia is dementia and not dig deeper, peel the onion back and try to figure out what type of dementia. I would like to see that shift a little more so people have a better understanding maybe of the journey to expect. Not all dementias are equal. We will see some different outcomes here and there. Um, I think that's one thing. I think that we're definitely finding that just because we have dementia doesn't mean we have to take the vacuum cleaner away. What do I mean by that? I saw a family one time that as soon as mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, they took her vacuum cleaner away. I said, well, she can't do that anymore. And they were going down their list of what they didn't want her to do anymore. We're finding that it's more about what we can do than what we can't do and maintain
Right.
for as long as possible. I think we're seeing a whole shift to that as we're seeing more dementia friendly programs, dementia friendly communities, dementia capable being the word now versus friendly. It's about capabilities. And there's a whole shift, I think, even in we're not there yet, but we're seeing it more in our professional care culture as well. it's less about the limitations and more about the abilities. And I think we're going to see more of that too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's a really important point, right? What and helping families to allow and invite our people with dementia with us as much as they can. Really only worrying mostly about their safety. Can they, you know, there's going to be a time when they can't they can't do certain things anymore, right? And so making sure we're aware of what that is, but not then saying, well, so now you can't come to the family party. Might be how we look at doing that, and or family gatherings, right? So I think that's really important to think about, is keeping people as involved as possible, and shaping that a little differently. Have you found that the business of assisted living has changed, that they are becoming more dementia capable or dementia aware?
Oh, sure. I think so. I think long-term care in general is certainly doing a better job. Certainly, we all still have some room to grow, but I think we're seeing a much better dementia friendly, dementia capable culture in general in that direction.
Yeah, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. I know sometimes people are very reluctant to have their loved one in a facility rather than being at home, and I always tell families, every family's different.
Mhm. Yeah,
There's pros and cons to everything. So not to feel shamed if you do one, and other people, because somebody's going to tell you you're doing the wrong thing. At least that's what I found. People were telling me I was doing the wrong thing, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm the person though, so.
it is certainly a very personal choice. I was that person who had promised my mom that I would never put her anywhere that she didn't want to be, and that I would take care of her myself. And then came the day that I tore my meniscus in my knee transferring her, and
Mm,
I just couldn't do it anymore. My mom was not happy with me,
yeah,
but I couldn't do it anymore. And
yeah,
it was probably a good 6 months past when I should have, at least.
yeah.
And that was the daughter, not the professional. The professional would have thought about the fact that the sooner I got mom into a place that was appropriate for her, the sooner she could have integrated in her highest functioning capacity, made friends, got to a place where she was happy and well adjusted, and her needs were being met. And I
Mm,
could have gone back to being her daughter and not trying to be all things to her. So to me, that's what these programs are all about. It's letting that person who is the family member be that family member again, and not be a 24/7 caregiver, because no one really can be when they really need 24/7 care.
yeah, that is so important. I'm so glad you shared that, and thank you. Thank you for sharing that insight, because I think that's something that a lot of people, that's a struggle, right? That's a really difficult decision. And there's a lot of noise out there about what, and then we should on ourselves with that noise, right? Where it's like, I should do this, right? I made this promise and that kind of thing. But life, life takes its turns. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about, this was the daughter in me and that was the professional in me. I thank you so much for that. That's really very wise. So, Marianne, I'm so excited that we had some time to talk, and I want to tell us where we can find your books.
Sure. Well, Meet Me Where I Am and Alzheimer's Care Guide and Grandma and Me, they can be found anywhere you find a book. They're out there anywhere and everywhere. And I Choose to Remember is on the website only, on Angel Tree Publishing website.
Okay, wonderful. And all of those, or at least I know Meet Me Where I Am and Grandma Me can definitely be found on the Owls Authors website. We have
Yeah.
those available in our bookstore. And now, did you do any audiobooks for either of those?
I believe Meet Me Where I Am is in an audiobook through Morgan James Publishing.
Excellent. That's terrific. And the reason I say that is because, boy, caregivers sometimes,
Yeah.
this is why we have a podcast, because sometimes we just need to plug in because we don't have time to sit down and read something. So that's great. And then we can find you at Angel Tree Publishing, correct?
Yes, and Angel Tree Publishing through that website. And I am on former Twitter, now X. I am on that as well with the RN for ALZ.
Wonderful. RN for ALZ. Terrific. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we go? I've been delighted to talk with
No,
you.
I just want to say what a great resource ALZ Authors is. I always say it's kind of like a box of chocolates for caregivers. Just dive right in. You keep on biting. You're going to find that one that's just great for you. And, I'm just very honored to be part of this resource. And my heart just goes out to all the caregivers. Blessings to everyone. Thank you so much for having.
Oh, well, it's been delightful. Thank you. And I think you've shared some really amazing pieces of information. Yeah. And I love that. We're like a box of chocolates. So that's terrific. You'll find something you like. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mary Ann. And all of your
you.
information will be in our show notes. And so our listeners can find you and find your amazing books. And just thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for all you do. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, a podcast produced by alzauthors.com, a community dedicated to supporting caregivers and people with dementia through heartfelt personal stories. Please hit the subscribe button and like buttons, and we'd love to hear your comments. To learn more about ALZ Authors, be sure to go to alzauthors.com and subscribe to our newsletter so you can be among the first to know everything happening at ALZ Authors. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we share a wealth of resources for the dementia journey. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. See you soon.